I very much want to thank the sponsors this evening, and before I really thank them, I want to mention the Queens Jewish Community Council is doing a tremendous amount of work here in Queens. Mrs. Cynthia Zlitsky and Mr. Warren Hecht are here from the Queens Jewish Community Council, and the extent of poverty that Mrs. Zlitsky just mentioned to me is actually frightening. The fact that some 30,000 homes, Jewish homes in Queens, are considered under the poverty level. But what's particularly nogea right now is the fact that they have a program that they're running, that's basically it's kosher meals for wheels. They call it the Project Chaim. They deliver food to older people in the community. They'll deliver each week the entire week's food for the individual. The average person that they deliver the food to is 88 years old, which means to say it's a very real need. And each week the council delivers to 135 people. Now, unfortunately, the funding was just cut. July 1st, the funding for that was cut, and the Queens Jewish Community Council is basically existing on, or at least keeping this program based on people's donations and people's goodwill. So if you're able to contribute, if you're able to help them, it's a very real schus, a very real need, and it's certainly a mitzvah. So I want to just mention that. I also want to thank the Queens Jewish Community Center for being one of our sponsors this evening. I also want to thank Chazaq, Yaniv, who's always there and always amazing with his energy and his support. And I also want to thank TorahAnytime.com, who are also partners in this evening. The Gemara tells us that Ba'achris hayomim, at the end of days, when Mashiach comes, there will be a unique gathering. The entire world will gather, but the gathering that the Gemara describes is not a joyous occasion. It's not celebrations, not dancing in the streets. The Gemara describes it as Softa Aretz Mishpachot. There'll be eulogies, crying, bitter tears throughout the world. And the Gemara says, why would that be? When Mashiach comes, evil ends, mankind is redeemed, the human race understands life in a fundamentally different manner, and life takes on a whole new meaning. Why are they crying? Explains the Gemara, because it's for the Yetzer Hara Shemerag, because Hashem kills the Yetzer Hara. Says the Gemara, that's a reason to say a hesped, that's a reason to cry, that's a reason to dance. And explains the Gemara that actually what happens is, Lasilovo, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yetzer Hara, Hashem brings the Yetzer Hara, and Hashem shechs him in front of the Tzaddikim and in front of the Rishonim. Hashem literally puts an end to evil, but not just in a euphoric kind of, or euphemistic kind of manner. Hashem literally kills the Sultan, ends that power in the world. But Hashem does it in front of the Tzaddikim, in front of the righteous ones, and in front of the Rishonim. And then the Gemara goes on to say, Tzaddikim, to the Tzaddik, the Yetzer Hara appears like a Har Gavoa, like a powerful mountain. To the Rishonim and to the wicked people, he appears like a Chut Asara, like a hair. Halal Bochim, Valal Bochim, each group cries. Tzaddikim Bochim Va'omrim, the Tzaddikim cry because they say, how can we possibly vanquish this mountain? And they see the Yetzer Hara as a powerful force. They see him as a mountain, and they cry, saying the words, how can we have possibly won against this mighty tyrant? And the Rishonim cry. But the Rishonim cry because they see a different image, and they cry because they say the words, how can we have fallen for this chutta sa'ara, this hair, this nothing, this weak little thing? Each group cries, and that's how the Gemara explains that moment. And I'd like to ask two rather obvious questions on that Gemara. Question number one is, which one's right? The Tzaddikim see the Yetzer Hara as a powerful mountain. The Rishonim, the wicked people, see him as a thin hair. Which image is correct? But question number two is far more profound. If we try to imagine something outside of our frame of reference, typically it's difficult. If a blind man would try to envision seeing, it's a very great jump for him. And you can imagine a blind man asking the question, how can you tell whether it's an elephant or a giraffe when it's so distant? How can you tell if it's a building or a car? But more than that, how can you possibly know whether that object is moving closer to you or further away? You can't touch it, you can't sense it. Because to a blind man, vision is not within his frame of reference. And for us, one of the things that's not in our frame of reference is what it's going to be like in the time of Mashiach. But the Rambam is very clear. The Rambam says, Olam kiminhago noheg. The world will continue in the very same manner that it does now. You'll still get a job, you'll still take a seed and plant it in the ground. The world physically will be identical to the world we live in now. The key distinction between now and the time of Mashiach is Molei ha'aretz deyas Hashem. The entire world will be filled with knowledge of Hashem. Every human being will get it. Every human being will know that Hashem is present right here. Hashem created the world. Hashem maintains physicality. Hashem orchestrates every action on the planet. And Hashem is present. And that single piece of knowledge changes everything. And jealousy disappears. And evil disappears. I won't steal from you because number one, Hashem runs the world. And Hashem gives what each person needs. Number two, Hashem is here watching. But it's so clear and so obvious that every human being understands it. And if you can imagine from darkness, suddenly the sun rises, and it rises to its full height. With the brilliance of a sun at midday, every human being understands life in a fundamentally different manner. Therefore, I understand why the wicked people cry. They wasted this one opportunity called life. If in that one blazing moment of reality they recognize that they blew it, they had one chance to grow, to accomplish, and who they are for eternity is what they made themselves into, I understand why the wicked people cry. But why do the tzaddikim, why do the righteous people cry? They should be dancing. I don't care how powerful he is, I don't care how mighty, he looks like a mountain, Hashem killed him, you won. Why are they crying? Now let's see if we could try to answer these two questions and get a better understanding of what this Gemara is sharing with us. And to do that, let me share with you an interesting observation. One of the biggest mistakes that we human beings make constantly is we think of ourselves as physical beings. Listen, I'm physical. You punch me, ow, you hurt me. You hurt my arm, you hurt me. And we get so accustomed to thinking of ourselves as physical beings that when we, every once in a while, have a spiritual experience, it's almost strange. You'll come to Shul on Yom Kippur, and you'll feel holiness. Maybe on Shabbos, you'll feel something in the day. You'll really feel like you're speaking to Hashem. And it's strange because here I am, this physical being, temporarily having this spiritual experience. My friends, nothing could be further from the truth. You and I are not physical beings temporarily having spiritual experiences. I, the one who thinks, the one who feels, began under the Kisei HaKavod. Hashem chose a generation, Hashem chose a family into a particular birth order. Hashem put me into this body, but I, the one who thinks, I, the one who feels, am not physical. When I go to sleep at night, my body is still there. In the good old days, how'd you kill the king? The king was a mighty, he was a lout, but he was also a warrior, and he was always armed. When the king went to sleep, you killed him because the king he wasn't there. His body's there, but he is not there. You see, I am the one inside. I tell my arms to move. I tell my legs to move, but I am not physical. Now, it's a little strange because my entire life I've always been here. I've always woken up every morning and I've been in this body, but it's I inside who feels, who thinks, who remembers, am inside this body. And when you begin to think in these terms in a far more enlightened manner, you begin to come to the first question that should hit a thinking person. And that is, how do you take an neshama, a soul, an I, brilliant and incisive, who understands why I'm here, who recognizes that every action creates an indelible imprint in me. Every mitzvah helps me grow, every avera damages me, but every conversation, every thought is a part of me forever. So how do you take a brilliant, thinking neshama and give it free will? Meaning to say, I would never do something that would be damaging to myself purposely. I wouldn't drink a cup of bleach for $100, I wouldn't do it. If you gave me a jug of Clorox, you could offer me $1,000, $10,000. I'm not going to down it. Why? Because it's foolish. So how do you take the I, brilliant and understanding, and actually give it free will? So to do that, Hashem put us into this body that's not just a physical body. The body has a part to it that's almost physical but not quite. It's called the nefesh habahami, the animal soul of man. And if you'd like to clearly recognize and define the nefesh of man, the nefesh habahami, just go into the wild kingdom and you'll find that each species has been programmed with all of the instincts, all of the needs, all of the desires to keep itself alive. The Siberian tiger instinctively hunts the deer. The robin hungers for the worm. The robin doesn't say, based on the general availability as well as the nutritional value, I think I'll use the worm as my food staple. The robin hungers for the worm, but there's a nefesh, and there's a part to the robin that's alive and that's real. A number of years ago in Rochester, we had a fellow who, when he was a little guy, his father bought him a puppy. And this fellow and the puppy grew up together. This fellow came to yeshiva, and it was very difficult on his dog because the dog missed his master. And every 6 weeks when this fellow would go home, his now grown dog was so overjoyed to see his master that the dog would run over and, excuse my expression, relieve itself on its master's pants leg. The fellow was not quite so happy to see his dog, but here's the point. There's a part to the dog that forms attachments, that forms a sense of identity with, and creates a certain bond. Hashem created in every animal in the animal kingdom a nefesh, a live, vibrant part with all of the instincts that it needs to stay alive, as well as bring the next species into existence. Every animal has a nefesh and has a brain. But make no mistake, the bird can seek 25,000 seeds that it laid in different places the past season, and it can find them. It will hide seeds in multiple mirrored places and find it because the bird has a brain, the bird has a nefesh, but it's extremely limited. The key distinction between the animal world and us is that I have an I, an anochi, an inner agenda, will. I am a person, but again, it's I, it's not my body, it's me. But to give man free will, Hashem put me into this body that has many drives and instincts. It has a nefesh habahami, and into that nefesh Hashem placed all of the instincts needed to keep man alive. And these two parts, the neshama and the nefesh habahami, are in constant battle. Each vying for primacy, each fighting for domination over the I, and each one vying to control me. However, that alone would not create free will. Why? Because still, I would never do something that's foolish. If you offered me $100 to put my hand in a fire, I wouldn't do it. If you offered me $1,000, I wouldn't do it. Why? Because again, it's a foolish activity. And if I, the neshama, recognize that these acts are good for me and these acts are bad for me, how could I be tempted? How could I be swayed? And to actually create real free will, Hashem put another dimension into man. Hashem created something called the Satan. The Gemara tells us that the Satan is a malach, a spiritual force. It's a spiritual force who is given a very particular job. His job is to even the playing field and to tempt me to do that which isn't wrong. Now, we in Western civilization, we're very sophisticated, and when you start talking about angels and spiritual forces, we get a little bit uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean we're right about it. And if you'd like to understand life in a much deeper manner you have to understand that Hashem created different forces in the world. One of those forces is something called a Satan, which is a malach, it's an angel, who's on the job 24/7, 364 with one job. His job is to get you to fail. His job is to get you to mess up, and his job is to get you to sin. However, he's only allowed to function in a very limited manner. If you or I had to face a malach head on, if this malach, this angel, this spiritual force, was given full allowance to operate at his full power, we'd be putty, we'd be history. But Hashem keeps him in check, and it's always in accordance to who you are. So imagine for a moment that I'm this sort of balance, half nefesh bahami, half nefesh sickly, my neshama balanced against the animal instincts within me. And imagine that 50-50, and the Satan is allowed to operate in a very limited fashion. He's allowed a little bit of power. What happens if I grow? What happens if I do what's right, what's good, what's proper? What happens if I listen to my neshama? The nefesh bahami, the animal soul, becomes weaker, has less sway over me. The neshama comes more to the fore. I become no longer 50-50, but now 60-40. The Satan, that angel, is allowed to function at a greater level. And if I get to 70-30, he's allowed more control. And if I get to 80-20, he's allowed even more. Would you like to understand this Gemara? Do you know why the Tzaddikim see this angel as a powerful mountain? Because they spent their lives perfecting themselves. They spent their lives working on themselves, and they spent their entire existence perfecting themselves to the extent that they got to 80-20, 90-10, 95-5, and therefore the Satan, that spiritual force, was allowed full control. And to them it appears like a mountain because that was the power that it was allowed to exhibit. You know, the Gemara says, Mishad Gadol Mechaver, one who's greater than his friend. Yitzro, his Yetzer, is greater than his friend. It does not mean his physical desires. It doesn't mean his appetites. Quite the opposite. If a person grows and accomplishes, he becomes the master of himself. But if he becomes the master of himself, and he completely masters his drives and desires, and he gets to the point where his neshama comes to the fore, and he clearly sees the value of every action and the impact, then there's no free will left. Why? Because he sees things with too great a clarity. And to allow for free will, even in that stage, Hashem allows the Satan more control, and when Hashem ends the Satan's reign, when Mashiach comes to the Tzaddikim, he appears like this powerful mountain, Har Gavoa. Why? Because that's the amount he was allowed to exhibit himself and function in their world. Why is it that to the wicked people he's like a chut asara, a hair? Because that's all they needed. For them to trip up, for them to fail, they were 50-50, maybe 60-40 the other way, and the Satan wasn't allowed much control. Why? Because they were anyway halfway down the pike, and he was only allowed to function in that limited way. And I believe that this Gemara is a fundamental concept to us, and I'll explain to you why. My father was born in Berlin. In 1938, he escaped. And he spent the war years in England. And I remember one time my father was telling me that they would read the papers, as any Jew certainly in those years did, with bated breath. And one day he read about the fact that the Allies were bombing the heavy water plants in Germany. And my father said they had the question, what in the world are you wasting good bombs to bomb a heavy water plant, whatever that is? And for the life of him, he couldn't understand why they would waste ammunition. In 1945, in August of that year, the world understood when two modern industrial cities were demolished, blocks and blocks, entire neighborhoods, an entire city was leveled. Humankind recognized that atomic power is a force that's well out of the previous understanding of mankind. One of the ingredients to create an atom bomb then was uranium. You needed heavy water to distill parts of it, but it wasn't until a little bit later that the average man in the street understood it. We live in a very sophisticated world. We live in a world where we understand that this solid object is actually electrons spinning, moving in constant motion, that most of physical objects are actually emptiness, and that if you were to magnify this and look at it on an atomic level, what you'd see is mostly vast emptiness with electrons spinning around, and everything that's really in existence is the bonds that are formed between electrons. Most of matter is empty. Now, we don't view the world that way, but we're aware of it. When you put your popcorn in the microwave and ding, 3 minutes later it comes out popped, and you're aware that modern science knows things that you and I don't. When they level cities, when they put nuclear submarines for 6 months in the ocean, you recognize that harnessing a force that my eye cannot see is something that actually works. What we understand is that much of what we recognize in the physical world is but the tip of the iceberg. We're very comfortable pulling out a cell phone, sending a signal to a satellite some 3 miles in the sky, which sends it to another satellite, which sends it to a relay station, and we talk to our friends, our neighbors 6,000 miles away as if they're around the corner. We don't see the microwaves, we don't see the transmissions, but we're very comfortable with knowing that there are things that my eye doesn't see but are still real. And if you're not sure that I'm correct, anyone here ever see electricity? What color is electricity? Anyone know? Well, it's no color because electricity is a theory. You cannot see electricity. When you see the lightning bolt, you're seeing the electrons burn off some impurity in the air, but electricity is not visible to human sight. Now, it's a pretty good theory, because if you try to put a key in a socket, you'll see that it's a very, very solid theory. But the point is, I don't see it. I don't see the wires running through my house. I don't see the electricity running through it. But I plug in my vacuum cleaner, it works. I get it. And as we are very comfortable with being aware of matter, energy, properties that exist that my eye doesn't see, one of the things that we have to also be aware of, that there are whole other dimensions that we're also not clued into. And one of those dimensions is the spiritual entities of this world. Everything that Hashem created, zeh u'mazeh, every physical property has a spiritual dimension to it. But not only does it have a spiritual dimension, the spiritual dimension is larger, and the spiritual dimension is more powerful, and the spiritual dimension is what keeps the physical part in existence. And one of the things that Hashem created in this world is something called the Satan, that is a malach who is on the job 24/7 with the sole job description of getting you and I to fail. Oh, come on, Rabbi, you want me to believe in angels? Angels? So it depends if you want to be sophisticated or you want to be a nar. If you don't want to be too enlightened, you can look at this physical thing and say it's a solid piece of wood and I don't believe in the atomic theory. But if you'd like to understand life on a deeper level and you open a sefer and see the way Chazaq described it, you see a very different world. One of the things, and probably the primary way that the sun works in our world, is by speaking in your brain. And I want to clue you into something that most people are not aware of. Open the Choftez Chaim Yeshiva, page after page after page of what the Satan will say inside your brain. He speaks in your voice. He speaks with your inflections, with your sort of nuances, but explains in the Choftez he isn't you. It's a foreign entity speaking in your voice, speaking in your head. And if you ever heard someone say, I'm hearing voices in my head, you got it. You got it exactly. Come on, certainly I had voices? Yes, exactly. And if you're not sure that I'm right, let me sort of describe a little bit how he functions, and let's see if this resonates or not. The Satan is the greatest salesman who ever lived. You will never, ever see a salesman like him. And if you'd like to learn sales technique, study him. Technique number 1. Wow, this is the greatest, the most unbelievable thing. You gotta have it. I wow. I mean, nothing in the world compares to this. Whoa, this is unbelievable. And they'll build it up and build it up. And week after week, it's great, it's unbelievable, it's great. But you know that it's also, it's forbidden. And they'll say, come on, look at you. And you suffer so much. And you have such a rough life. And no one takes care of you. Come on, you deserve a little pleasure in this world. Come on, it's not so bad. And you'll say inside your head, I'm not doing that. That's forbidden. It's usher. I'm not doing it. And this is when the Satan gets to work. Come on, it's not so forbidden. It's not a clear isser. It's not so bad. It's not so bad. Week after week after week, he'll take a major avera, something that you recognize clearly as wrong, and he'll make it littler and littler and littler and teeny and tiny and teeny and tiny until finally you do it. And then, oh my goodness, you know you did? You just did the largest sin in the world. I know you did. You just did the most egregious act ever. I can't believe it. You're the most dirty slime, and I can't even... You ever notice that? For weeks and weeks, there's a voice in your head saying, come on, it's not so bad, it's not so bad. Come on, other people do worse. Other people do plenty worse. Until you do whatever that is, and then, boom, it becomes the biggest, most large entity. Chofetz Chaim explains it. He says, you know, a telescope? You take a telescope and it takes an object that's very distant, and by focusing the light, you're able to see very clearly the details, the lunar craters, and you're able to see the texture. But if you take a telescope and turn it around and look at the wrong end, and it takes an object that's already distant and makes it even smaller, and explains all the time that's exactly one of the main tricks of the sun. Weeks and weeks, months and months, he takes an object, makes it smaller and smaller and smaller until you do it, and then, wow! He blows it up. And he's a Bucky and Shas and Poskim. And he'll quote for you things you never even remembered that you learned in 3rd grade. And he'll quote for you Gemaras, and he'll quote for you Rishonim, how bad and how evil you are. Pay attention sometimes to what goes on in your brain. Pay attention sometimes to your thought process, and you'll quickly see that we human beings are far more complex than modern psychology realizes. Because modern psychology has some ideas of some of the elements, but there's a whole dimension that they're clueless to. And if you'd like to see one of the strangest phenomena in human existence, just pay careful attention to the voices in your brain, pay careful attention to what you say to yourself, and what you quickly see is that much of it is not generated by you. And we're allowed to have a little fun. It's Erev and Kippur. All right, we'll skip it for now, but okay. Let's explain why the tzaddikim cry. Do you know why the tzaddikim cry when something is shechted? Do you know why? And Rashi explains very simply. Because at that moment, they look back on their life. At that moment, Mashiach is here, and like a blazing sun at midday, every human being sees clearly why we're here, and every human being recognizes life from a different vantage point. The tzaddikim look back on their life and see, oh my goodness, he was here and here, bothering me and bothering me, creating trouble, creating problems. What am I talking about here? Okay, let me enjoy myself for a minute. You'll humor me. You have a 9th grader, young yeshiva bocher, away at a yeshiva out of town, and he's walking down the street, and he passes a treif pizza shop. Now, what happens? All of a sudden, there's a strange voice in his head that says, psst, hey, psst, why did you like that? Take a whiff. Smells pretty good, huh? Yeah. Hey, psst, you're hungry, aren't you? Yeah. And that smells probably better than anything you ever smelled in your life, huh? Yeah, it really does. Psst, why don't let's go across the street, guys? A little closer, Okay. Hey, where we going, guys? Where we going? Hey, come on, you should go. Where we going? And our fearless hero finds himself across the street, a little closer to the pizza shop. And a voice in his head says something like, "Psst, hey, why don't you just take a deep whiff? That smells great, doesn't it? Yeah. It smells better than anything you've ever smelled in your life, doesn't it? Yeah. And I bet you're so hungry, aren't you? Yeah. Hey guys, what's going on here? Come on. What's happening? What's going on? Hey, don't listen to that. Let's go in. Let's go. Let's for the fun of it. Let's go and buy something. We're not gonna eat anything. Let's just buy. Okay. Hey, where we going? We're going. You heard the man. Well, we're just gonna go into the pizza shop. Okay. Hey, who do that? All right. Anyway, our fearless hero buys 6 pies, eats them, has his stomach pumped next day. What am I describing? Within you, there are 3 parts. And we human beings are clueless. There is a nefesh bahami, which is a powerful group of desires, appetites, and hungers. And there is a seichel that's brilliant in understanding, and there's a third voice that speaks in my head. And if you begin studying yourself, you begin to understand life a little differently. If you begin studying what really happens, you begin realizing that things aren't quite as simple as you once thought. Let me give you a couple of examples. Maybe it'll help. A number of years ago, when I first began, I was in yeshiva. I'm a pretty reasonably competitive person, and there was a fellow who was in my shiur. He was much smarter than me, and he was a tremendous masmid. He was a powerful guy, and I sort of used him as my target. Whenever he would leave the base medrash, I would stay till he left, and however early in the morning he would come. We sort of competed one with the other. It was a friendly competition, but I found it very helpful. However, here was the problem. He was smarter than me, better than me in learning, and he always left the base medrash after me, and was there before me in the morning. And he really was a very solid guy in learning. Okay. Anyway, after that summer, I came back to yeshiva, and I found he wasn't there. I sort of asked what happened. Somebody said, he went to work. I was very surprised. He was a young guy, he was 19, and I didn't understand why he stopped learning. You want to get an education, you can do that at night. Well, I didn't get it. Okay. A number of years later, I met him at a wedding, and I said, we started talking here, doing good. And I said to him, I'm a little curious. I remember we used to learn together, we used to be friendly, and all of a sudden you were gone. What happened? He said, I'll tell you what happened. I'm not cut out for learning. Not for me. I don't have the head for it. I don't have the legislation. I don't have the energy. Not for me. And I found it a little funny because I was still in yeshiva. This guy was better than me. This guy was smarter than me. This guy was more involved in learning. So I said, so who is cut out for learning? He said, a guy like you, pointing to me. And I said to myself, oh my goodness, I get it. He threw away his entire future because he fell for one of the greatest tricks. My friends, if you pay attention to the lines that we sell ourselves and the damage that we do to ourselves on a regular basis, I'm telling you it's frightening. As a high school Rebbe, I used to see this all the time. It didn't happen quite this way, but almost this way. Monday night and Wednesday night. Monday night, I get a guy who was very, very successful. Very good at learning, very good at secular studies, great basketball player, very popular guy, all minus. And he'd come to me and say, Rebbe, you want to talk to her? It's the guy I was doing. I don't feel good about myself. I feel like I'm accomplished. I just feel like a loser. So I try to talk to him, try to straighten out his thinking. Wednesday night, the guy comes in. The guy is not particularly good at learning, not particularly good in secular studies, not a good ball player, not very popular, about an average as you get. Rebbe, we're talking, what's up? I can't help a feeling, but I'm just better than everyone else. I don't want to feel that way, but I just feel I'm superior. Can you help me? And I said to myself, oh my goodness, can we just switch brains? Take Monday night guy's brain and put in a Wednesday night guy, and we'd be perfect. But if you pay attention to the damage that most people do to themselves with thoughts, what you quickly see is that there's some strange things going on in the human. And some of these things are obvious and some aren't. So let me give you some obvious ones. What about a guy who every time he davened Shemona Esrei, when he gets to the word Hashem, excuse me saying in the shul, the word Jesus pops into his brain. Now, the psychologist explained to him that it's something called obsessive compulsive disorder, but it doesn't make him feel any better. But that's an extreme case. And what if I tell you that very good people, very solid people, on a regular basis destroy their future because they believe either that they're worthless or they can't succeed, or there's a voice inside that bothers them until they do things that are so destructive to themselves. Want to hear another example that the ladies may not appreciate so much? I've seen very firm women who know why they're here, understand life, and they go out dressed perfectly. Sleeves all the way down, skirt all the way down, except one problem. The clothing that they wear looks like it's painted on them. Like someone took a spray can and it sneers, come on, it's modest. Don't come on. But how could you do that? How could you do that when you're embarrassing yourself, the dignity and the honor? The answer is because this is what's done. I can't look like I don't know how to dress. I can't be not like, acceptable, and people do things. And my friends, what I'm sharing with you is that the forces that make a person do many of the things that we do are not just regular thoughts, but there's a powerful malach who's on the job 24/7, speaking in your brain and making you do things that you normally wouldn't, that you certainly don't want to do. Now, if you want to get really sophisticated, you could listen for him, but even if you don't, just analyze your own thinking. And I'll explain to you what I mean. Here's a question I want to ask you. In a few days, it's going to be Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we have a specific mitzvah called Inui, certainly not to eat, not to drink. Now, isn't that strange? Yom Kippur is a day of slicha and mechila. Yom Kippur is a day a person can get close to Hashem. Yom Kippur is a day we're going to spend the whole day in shul davening. Wouldn't you assume that it would be wise to eat a good breakfast, come into shul with energy, you got a whole day of davening in it, and have so much to think about, so much to discuss, so much to work on in your own life? Obviously, you need a good nutritional breakfast, and yet the Torah says to fast. Why is that? So the Chazaq explains why it is. He says, don't you understand? There are different parts to I. There's a part of me that's a neshama, that's brilliant, that's incisive, that understands why I'm here. And there's a nefesh bahami, that's all of the animal drives in the human, and those two parts are competing. And the more you feed either one, the stronger it becomes. And you ever notice what happens about 2 o'clock Yom Kippur day? There's a different sort of clarity. There's a different sort of understanding. It's not just the day, there's a difference in you. And granted, you're not as strong, and granted, you're not as maybe vibrant and alert, but there's a different perception that you have. And why is that? Because your body has less sway. And the other part of you has less control, and you're more lucid. You're able to see things more clearly because the part of you, your neshama, has come out more to the fore. And I'd like to share with you that there are two main things that a Jew should be doing on Yom Kippur. One, obviously, is reviewing your actions, your conversations, what you said to who, and that's called doing tshuva, and that's called going through the whole process of tshuva. But there's something else that a person should be doing on Yom Kippur, and that is a major look at your life. You should be spending time on Yom Kippur asking yourself, am I happy with me? Am I satisfied with the way I'm living my life? Certainly, it's a very good time to look at relationships. You ever notice that couples come to the marriage therapist, to the Rov, and everyone is pointing a finger at the other? I have never once had a couple come in and say, we both agree that it's his fault. No, we both agree it's her fault. No, we're in agreement it's her fault. Please help us. That's not what I say. His fault, her fault. And it's always the other one's fault. And it's always my spouse. The problem is my spouse. Now I have a question. It can't always be mine. Why is that? Because we human beings are very, very good at remembering the pain that others cause us, but we're not so skilled at remembering what we did to agitate them to bring it on. If you're like a very good Muslim exercise on Yom Kippur, think about every troubled relationship you have, but now with a different vantage point, with new eyes. When the body becomes weaker and you're able to be somewhat self-introspective, somewhat honest, ask yourself, okay, what was my share of the gift? My share? She's a... No, stop it. Stop it. What was my part in the equation? And if you pay careful attention and you really analyze, what you'll find is that many of the lines that we sell ourselves aren't true. Yom Kippur is a unique day. It's a day when a Jew can reach different understanding, different feelings. And by the way, it's a day when the sun is not on the job. It's only 364, but the sun is not allowed to bother you on Yom Kippur. And what that means is you have a clear head. It's you, and your body's getting weaker, and you can look at your days, look at your life, ask yourself, am I happy with me? And if not, what's my game plan? What am I going to change? What am I going to work on? What am I going to do differently this year than I did before? And it's a day that you can feel things that you wouldn't feel the rest of the year. It's a day when you could do introspection and thinking that you normally wouldn't reach. And it's also a good day to ask yourself, do I really understand things well? You see, the ultimate solution to the Satan is something called truth. And by the way, it's a very wise idea to ask Eitzah, to ask others, whether it be friends, whether it be older people, preferably someone older and wiser, because invariably we are caught up in ourselves, invariably we're nogeya, and it's very hard to see through things. I think this Gemara shares with us a powerful perspective. The Rishonim see the Satan killed, and the Tzaddikim see him killed, and each cry. And the Rishonim, the wicked people, cry because they say to themselves, I blew it. I blew eternity for nothing. I gave it up for a hair. It was nothing. But the reason why the Tzaddikim cry is because at that moment, there's a sudden hush. You ever notice you're on an El Al flight, and after 13 hours the plane lands, and they shut the jets off, and there's a deafening silence. And only when they shut off the jets do you realize how noisy they were till then. The reason why the Tzaddikim cry is not because he's monstrous, not because he was so powerful, but because they look back on their lives and they say, oh my goodness, he was here and here, that day and that day, in my brain, talking and bothering me, talking and bothering me. You ever hear the expression, demons in your head? And my friends, it is a major, major issue. And you have to daven, and you have to ask Hashem for help, and you have to watch your thinking. And I want to share one thought, and that is that if you don't control your thoughts, you are toast. You see, your thinking shapes your moods, your thinking shapes your feelings, your thinking shapes your reality. And if you don't control your thoughts, something else does. Either your appetites, drives, desires, nefesh habami, or the Satan, whatever it may be. But you can control your thinking. And it sometimes means doing very real exercises. And that means if a person has a negative self-esteem and they're constantly beating themselves up, it means controlling it and learning to say the words, no, I'm in charge, I'm not thinking those thoughts, I'm thinking the thoughts I want. And if a person begins taking control of their thinking, they begin taking control of their life, and they begin a different track in life. Everyone has it, everyone deals with it, and I think this Gemara shares with us the extent of how much a part of us it is. And I want to close with one last thought. And that is the Mashal disagrees with one thing that Rashi says. Rashi says that Tzaddikim cry because in that moment they see how powerful the Son was, how involved in their lives he was, and that's why they cry. Mashal says, I agree. It's vastly different than they saw when they were alive. And it's vastly different when they saw before Mashiach came, but it doesn't make sense why they would cry. Because now they're at the point when everyone gets it. They're at the moment of the finish line. Even if they see the pain, even if they see what they suffered, they now should be dancing a jig. They should be happy as a lark. Why would they cry? Would you like to know what the Rosh says? I'll explain it to you with a Moshe. A number of years ago, I was a high school Rebbe, and I pulled a muscle in my back. There was a dentist in town who used to do powerlifting. He said to me, listen, I'll take you to the gym, and there's a coach there. Art will make you as good as anything. So I went with this fellow down to the gym, and I met Art. Art was the widest human being I'd ever met. And Art would bench press 400 pounds like it was nothing. And Art was a very interesting fellow and a very dedicated coach. He worked with me and for a good while, and it was very effective, and it helped my problem. And after a while, there was a fellow in the Kollel who was a bit yeshivish, who said to me, I know you go to the gym regularly, would you take me? And I looked at this guy, and I said to myself, oh my goodness. I mean, when I was a kid, I played ball, I lifted weights. It wasn't, when I went to the gym, it was something I was familiar with. This was a type of fellow who probably doesn't know which end to hold the basketball on, hasn't worked out in his life. I said, sure, let's go. So I took him down. I guess when he walked in with the sweatpants and the black shoes, Art recognized pretty quickly that we're not dealing with a world-class athlete. But this fellow, Art, was a very dedicated coach, and he worked with him very closely. And this Yeshiva fellow started learning how to lift weights. He started learning how to deadlift, how to squat, started bench pressing. And after 6 weeks, this fellow says to me, something, that guy, Art, the coach, I don't know what's wrong with him. Every time I get the motion right, he puts more weight on the bar. What's wrong with the guy? I said to myself, Art, progressive weight training is about increasing the load on the body. When you increase the load, the body is forced to respond. It's not about the motion, it's about putting more weight so you can force the body to grow. Moshe says that's pshat. Do you understand what the righteous people, what the tzaddikim see? At that moment they recognize how much bigger, how much greater they are because of that force in the world called the Yetzer Hara, called the sun. At that moment, they recognized that every time he was there bothering them, every time he was there giving them trouble, he forced them to reach in deep within themselves, and forced them to grow, forced them to become a different person. And the person that they are now, those great people, they are because of him. Having a personal coach on the job, 24/7, 364. And as you find yourself thinking things and being bothered by things, recognize where they come from, recognize what they're about, try to gain control of your thinking. And again, in Kippur specifically, a day very much slated for that. And Kadosh Baruch Hu grant us the wisdom and the ability to put it into practice. May this be very good, meaningful in Kippur. Again, I just want to mention that on the way out, if you want, we have the marriage seminar, the free CDs, and the marriage seminar in general. And I want to again thank the sponsors. A good night,